How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Euro, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the front control arms in your B9 Audi S5. So on the table in front of me, we do have the front control arm kit from 034 Motorsport. This is part of their street density kit. This has a stronger durometer rubber in all of the bushing locations, which will give you a little bit more performance-minded replacement instead of the factory replacement that most people go with. That being said, we'll be replacing a lot of the hardware in here as it is one-time use. And additionally, we did find it necessary to replace the two lower ball joint bolts, as again, they are all one-time use bolts. The manufacturer doesn't necessarily have a service interval for these front control arms. However, it is good practice at about 40 to 60,000 miles to keep an eye on the control arms. They do tend to wear as they are only made out of rubber, and as the vehicle is going over bumps, you may experience some creaking, you may experience some clunking. Additionally, you may feel the vehicle drifting in its lane while traveling at highway speeds. That would be a very extreme bushing wear, but physically you can see the bushings starting to tear away from their center point, whether you're looking at the upper or the lower. And some of these on the lower ones do have some hydraulic fluid that you may see leaking out of the bushing. And speaking of that, let's show you some of the tools we'll need to take care of the job. And on the table in front of me, we have all the tools that we're going to need to go ahead and replace the control arms on the front of our B9 Audi S5. For starters, we're going to need to take off the wheels. We're going to want an impact gun or a breaker bar with a 17 millimeter. I also have a smaller 3/8 impact gun. You may want to have both of these handy. Getting into some of the smaller, tighter areas. We want to do a double check of the ride height. So I have a tape measure. It's also metric, which will make for a little bit more of a precise measurement. I do have a 12 millimeter triple square here. It's a stubby version. If you have one smaller than this, that would be great. And I have it on a breaker bar. That's going to give us a little bit of extra clearance in the area. And we'll get into a little bit more detail with that in the DIY itself. A couple of pocket screwdrivers, 90-degree pick, and a forked panel tool will be helpful for moving some of the trim panels, some of the connectors, and things like that. Variation of 3/8 and maybe even 1/2 extensions. As far as your bits and sockets are going to go, we have a T25, a T30, a 12-point 16 millimeter, and then a 10 millimeter, a 13 millimeter, a 16 millimeter, an 18 millimeter, and a 21 millimeter socket. You may need those in a variety of depths and lengths. Probably going to need a couple of shorter sockets actually. And for separating some of the portions of the knuckle and removing the ball joint, we will need a strut spreader. This is going to make sure that we don't do any damage to the knuckle trying to remove that and make for an easy removal and installation of that lower ball joint. I do have a couple of 3/8 ratchets here. A little bit longer one is going to be very helpful for adding a little bit of leverage in some of those hard to reach areas where you're not going to be able to get those impact guns in there. And then as far as wrenches go, we do have a 9 millimeter, a 10 millimeter, and then for some of the larger wrenches, you're going to want probably two of everything. Two 16 millimeters, two 18 millimeters, and two 21s. And you'll notice I have a wide variety of different lengths, giving us a little bit more leverage to help us out throughout this job. I do have a 3/8 torque wrench here, but we also may want a 1/2 torque wrench to make sure that we get through the wide variety of torque specs throughout the front control arms here. Definitely going to want a small to medium pry bar, making sure that we're able to get those control arms in and out of the subframe. We're probably going to want a hammer and a mallet, making sure that we can get everything fitted back into place. Getting some of those lower ball joints out, we're going to have to use a ball joint popper, and if that is not doing the trick, we may even use a socket with an extension, putting the nut back on the ball joint and impacting the bottom of the extension to try to break that ball joint free from the knuckle. The knuckles are made of aluminum, so you don't want to hammer on the knuckle directly. Either the ball joint popper or the socket on the end of the ball joint should do the trick. I also have here a pair of spring clamp pliers. You can certainly use a pair of channel locks or a pair of adjustable jaw pliers. We will have to work with some of the spring clamps on the inner tie rods. And that pretty much takes care of everything, except for obviously you're going to have the car up on the lift. And when you're torquing some of these suspension bushings down, you're going to want to have a way to get the vehicle back down on ride height. Whether that's on a drive-on lift, you'll see we might be using a couple of pieces of wood to get the vehicle off the ground, or just using a pole jack or a floor jack to kind of compress the suspension, and then measuring to get your ride height close to where you should be. So with that, let's go ahead and get these control arms replaced. All right, before we get started, before we remove anything, with the vehicle still all the way on the ground, we do want to take a brief ride height measurement. As with any time we're replacing suspension bushings, we want to make sure that we tighten them all up at the specified ride height. So if you're doing this while you're installing coilovers, this is probably not a good time to do your ride height. However, in our case, we will be replacing the factory control arms and we want to make sure that we're putting the vehicle back to its stock ride height. So we're just going to go to the center of the Audi logos here. Going off the bottom of the fender, I've got about 365 millimeters. That being said, when we have the wheel off and the vehicle's up in the air, we'll have the lower control arms disconnected, and we can put a pole jack or a floor jack underneath the hub. We'll rise the whole hub assembly up, trying to get that center of the hub close to the 360 to 370 millimeter mark, and then we'll torque those bushings down. And the biggest reason for doing the control arm bushings at ride height, not only is it going to make for an interesting bump steer and or preload to the control arms, as you go down the road, you're going to be forcing those bushings to torque and twist in a different direction than they normally would. If you have the suspension at full droop and you tighten those bolts up, as the suspension comes up and the vehicle settles at ride height, all those bushings are going to be twisting in the wrong direction. So we will be torquing all of these at the ride height, so as the suspension goes up or down, the bushings have plenty of room to deflect. And one more note, make sure you have a full tank of gas as well as a spare inside the car. And now that we've got our ride height measured, let's get the car up in the air so we can start getting our control arms out. All right, we're gonna go ahead and remove our wheel. So the first step in our repair here today, we are gonna be removing the ABS harness just to get it out of our way, make sure that we don't pull that while we're removing any of these control arms or anything to gain access to it. We also do not wanna have this in the way upon reassembly. We could pinch that wire. So again, just to make sure that we don't damage that, we are gonna get that out of our way. Just using a pick to release the connector. You need to get the red lock out of the back first, and then I'm going to use a pick to release the connector and slide that off the ABS sensor. And usually you can get these off by hand. I'm going to use the pick to kind of push it out of its groove there. Same thing on this one. I'm just going to, and then on the back one, this one will wiggle out a lot easier. And again, we just want to get this out of the way so we don't damage it. Now that we've got the harness out of the way, we're going to go after the upper pinch bolt for the upper control arms. That being said, this may be a lot more corroded than the one that we have in this vehicle here today. You may want to soak this in penetrating oil. If you're reusing your control arms, you may want to consider something else other than penetrant. I would also like to mention that the whole upright here is aluminum, so you don't want to smash on this with a hammer. You also don't want to use any heat. You can start to distort or crack, making the aluminum brittle in the upright. So we're going to go ahead and crack this loose and see how free it is. Before doing so, we do want to support the knuckle to get the suspension up, because as you release this upper pinch bolt, it will start to pull down on those control arms. Those control arms will want to go up and the knuckle will want to come down because the strut's still connected. So when you're starting to get these out, you do want that supported so that this bolt has the best chance at releasing from the notches in the control arms, and we'll explain that a little bit more once we get it out. So we are supporting the suspension from the lower point of the fork on the strut that goes into the control arm, just to kind of take some of the weight off of the suspension so it's not at full droop. We're going to get it close to ride height, but not all the way, because the vehicle will start to lift off the two-post lift. You'll need two 16 millimeter wrenches or a socket wrench. I'm just going to use my longer one to break the nut free, and then we'll counter hold the other side. All right, the bolt's nice and free. We're getting lucky there. There's definitely a little bit of corrosion in there. Once you have that bolt released, hopefully it wasn't too much trouble. You'll notice that the control arms have a little bit of a dimple in the bottom. Good point for a punch or something like that. You could certainly take a hammer and try to release them. That one came out pretty easily. The back one may be a little bit of a difficulty because it is a little bit more of an angle. So we'll just try to tap that one out as well. And there we go. And now again, yours may have a lot more corrosion, so that is why I was suggesting to use a punch. The bottom of these control arms do have a small dimple for that, and you'll notice this one is starting to develop some rust and corrosion. And then one more thing I wanted to point out was that these control arms on the ball joint end do have a, I guess you could call it a little provision where the bolt actually sits. So that is why we supported the control arm, because once this is installed in here, this bolt will pretty much hang on that. And if you let the suspension come at full droop, as you're trying to remove this, these ball joints or control arms are actually starting to pull up while you're trying to remove this, and it starts to bind things up. So The best way to ensure that you have a good chance at removing that upper pinch bolt is to make sure you have the suspension supported so that you can get past that provision and make sure that you don't have anything binding upon removal. It's just 2 more 16s on the upper corners of the strut to get these upper control arms out. We'll go ahead and do that now once we get the vehicle back down. So we're going to use an extended 16mm wrench to get the 16mm that go into the body for the back of the control arm. You may not be able to get an electric ratchet in here or a socket wrench, so you will probably want somewhat of a decent sized ratcheting wrench here. While we're getting that one out, I'll go ahead and crack this other one free as well. I should mention there is no nut, it does just go into the body. And you can see that bushing is toast. You can see it's completely separated around there. It's going to over rotate. You're not going to get a comfortable ride with this. You're going to get a lot of squeaking and creaking and clunking. That bushing is definitely the original unit. All right, and that one's even worse. That one's really bad. Good thing we're replacing these. I would like to make a little mention here. The bolts are very oddly shaped with this extended piece here. The 034 kit will come with 4 of the same bolts that will look just like the ones you take out of the driver's side. I'm not quite sure why they have this little extension. It may be a bolt that's used on another vehicle, but I just wanted to make mention that this is okay. You do have a weird bolt coming out, and you'll be putting a different bolt back in. Now that we're ready to install the upper control arms before moving on to the lowers, I just wanted to make mention that the control arms are not all the same. There is a left and a right side. The 034 ones do have a little R insignia for the right side. However, there are 2 right sides. You want to make sure that that R is facing towards the inside, or facing each other, if you will. The straighter, if you will, one is the leading control arm. The one that has a little bit of a curve to it is the trailing control arm. Those should all meet in the middle, and if you have them backwards, they will not line up in there, and you will maybe get them in there and just cause extra stress to the bushings. With that, let's go ahead and install these. So we're just going to install the front control arm here, fishing the bolt. You can start hand tightening it. You want to make sure that you get this perfectly threaded in there because it does go into the body. You're not threading this into something that can be replaced. If this gets damaged, you will have to tap a portion of the body. We're just going to snug this up with a wrench. We're not going to tighten this all the way. We do want to make sure that the bushings have a little bit of play so that they can find their home, and we'll tighten those back down at ride height. We don't want to stress these new bushings, otherwise they'll probably be in the same situation that they were upon removal in about a week. Now we can go ahead and move on to the other one. So I do like to make sure that when you're going to put this in there, you kind of keep that loose. It'll help you line the bolt up and make sure that it goes into the correct location. So we're just going to snug this one back up again. Still flexes quite a bit. Just want to make sure that it's not tightened up to the point where it's actually holding the bushing in place. You want to make sure that the bushing's moving with the arm and that the arm's not returning to the bushing position. Now that we have these loosely fitted, we can go ahead and reinstall these into the knuckle. You may need to reposition these ball joints. They are a little bit stiff, so working them a couple times will allow the ball joints to kind of fall into place and find their new home. Same thing on this back one. You may need to work these a couple times just to get these to move around a little bit. Do the same that we did upon removal. We'll start on the rear. All right, that one's good. So you can see that this ball joint is starting to fight us a little bit. Before forcing this in there with a hammer or using a pry bar to get it in there, we're going to support the bottom of the control arm again like we did upon removal. That'll hopefully give us a little bit less of an angle and let that fall into place without any damage. So let's get the car back up in the air a little bit higher, get a pole jack underneath it, and we'll catch you guys in a second. And just like that, it falls back into place. Again, with the knuckles supported, you're going to have a lot easier time getting these ball joints in and out. All right, now that we have our control arms installed, before we tighten anything up, we do want to put the pinch bolt in. This does not have to be tightened at ride height. You do have the ball joints that are going to adjust to the ride height, and tightening this up is not going to affect that. We want to make sure that we tighten our bushings at ride height. The ball joints are okay. So we're just going to go ahead and install the new bolt from 034's kit. We're going to go in from the back. And if you don't have these lined up correctly, this bolt will not fall into place. I would also like to mention that the nut that they supply is not a 16 millimeter. You have a 16 millimeter on the bolt head side and a 15 millimeter nut, but we are going to be torquing it to the 40 Newton meters that is suggested for the factory specification. And as you saw, that's not a very high torque. So it's just to really keep that bolt in place, and that bolt's gonna hold those ball joints in place. Now we can keep going on to the bottom end before tightening up the top. We're gonna replace the 2 bottom control arms. Once everything is all in, we can then tighten up all the bushings at ride height. So as we got the vehicle up in the air, you will notice that we already have our sway bar link disconnected. So in order to get that other side installed, I did have to release the sway bar. It is simply a 12-point 16mm bolt with a 16mm nut that you're pretty easily able to release. You'll notice that the bolt does hit the strut upon removal. So we're just gonna spin this one out of the way because it is already starting to bind up on us. We'll get that 12-point bolt out of the way as well. Before we go ahead and take anything off, we want to make sure we get the headlight level sensor out of the way. These things are very expensive and they are very fragile. So it is a 10mm nut, and we're going to counter hold that with a 9mm on the backside. So we're just going to go ahead and release the connector, making sure that the tab's not broken or anything like that. And we are going to actually take that bracket out because that bracket also holds in the heat shield, and that heat shield needs to come out in order to get the rear control arm out. So a couple of 10mm will get this heat shield down and out of the way. So there's a little slightly hidden 10mm up here. Then we have one more 10mm here. I'm going to try to release some of that harness to give us a little bit of room. Pulling this clip straight down without stabbing myself, hopefully. There we go. And on the backside, you can either open this clip up physically or just pop it completely out of the bracket. It's probably just easier to leave that on there. And we're just gonna get this harness out of the way. I'm gonna push this over the tie rod so it doesn't damage anything. Now we can unbolt the sensor, get the sensor completely out of our way, and then that'll give us access to the heat shield. I'm just gonna use a 10mm ratchet, crack that loose, and don't really have much swing with the ratchet there, so I'm going to take it out by hand, and it's fighting me. I'm gonna use the 10mm wrench just to crack these loose and get them out. It's not absolutely necessary to remove it. We just want to get it out of the way so that that bolt can come through. And when you're doing it on the other side, it's most definitely not going to come out. So just kind of loosen it up and get it freed up. Now that we've got some access to the front and rear control arms, we're going to start with, we've already got the sway bar link disconnected. So if you haven't done that yet, go ahead and do that. We're going to leave the upper portion of that connected. We're going to loosen up the lower portion of the strut fork. Then we will have to turn the wheel all the way to the side that we're working on. So if you're working on the right side, you want to turn the wheel all the way to the right. If you're working on the left side, you want to turn the wheel all the way to the left. What that's going to do is that's going to clearance this one control arm bolt, pushing this inner tie rod further out, giving us the clearance we need to get this one bolt out of the lower control arm here. So we're going to put a 18mm on the back side of that, counter holding it with another 18. All right. So we're going to go ahead and take the 16mm bolt out for the ball joint. Now we're going to just go ahead and get the bolt out for the inside portion of the control arm. We will need to turn the wheel all to the outside to give us some clearance to get this bolt all the way out, but I'm just going to loosen it up now while we have the car up in the air. All right, that may give us the clearance we need. And again, we just want enough clearance to get this bolt past that inside portion of the inner tie rod. So we're just going to counter hold the triple square while we continue to take out the 18. All right, now you can see we've got a little bit more clearance to get that bolt out, and it is just enough for it to squeak past that boot. And once the fork as well as the inner side of the control arm is removed, you need to just force this out and that'll come out. And now that that control arm is removed, all we need to do is get that ball joint out. And we will need a strut spreader, which also can be made from a small Allen drive, but it basically is a little oval that inserts into the provision for where the ball joint bolt goes. Turn it 90 degrees. And we can take our ratchet out of there. And that should allow the ball joint to pop right out. And there you have it. Ball joint, control arm. Those bushings are destroyed. That center bushing is starting to sag a little bit, and that ball joint is probably at the end of its useful life. Now we've got 3/4 of them to go, or taken out. Let's go ahead and move on to the rear control arm before reassembly. We're going to use two 18mm to go ahead and loosen the rear section of that control arm. Break it free first before having to counter hold it. You may have to wiggle the control arm to get it to come out of place, but again, that's why we removed that heat shield, give us some clearance for this bolt as it goes in towards the vehicle. Now we should be able to wiggle this control arm out of place. And there it goes. Last but not least, we do need to release it from the steering knuckle. It's a 21mm bolt on the bottom of that. We'll go ahead and get that ready to go. Best way to get this out is an impact. If you don't have an impact, there is a small counter hold. I believe it's a T40 in the bottom of there. This is a very tight bolt, so trying to counter hold that with a T40 for removal is not suggested. You may want some sort of an impact gun or maybe some sort of a large breaker bar to get that started. So we're gonna go ahead with our impact gun and a 21mm. We do not have a ball joint popper that is large enough for this one. So in order for us to get this ball joint removed, I am gonna lightly tighten that nut back onto the ball joint. I'm gonna grab another 21mm socket and an extension, a pretty big hammer, and try to get that forced out of that knuckle. One thing I do wanna mention is you do not wanna do any hammer strikes to try to release this from the knuckle by hitting that against the side of the steering knuckle here. This knuckle is made of all aluminum. There's a steel insert inside of the knuckle. And if you try to break this free the traditional way that you would with an old steel knuckle or an older vehicle trying to release a ball joint, you're gonna end up marring up this aluminum, most likely deforming the aluminum and perhaps even popping out the steel insert upon removal. So we're gonna try to take this out with no damage to the knuckle. We may damage the control arm, but we are going to be replacing them, so it's not too big of a deal. This may take me a couple of tries, but we're going to just basically use a 21mm socket on the 21mm nut, making sure that we hit the 21mm nut and not the end of the ball joint. If you're reusing this, make sure you have the nut on there. By having the nut on there, it'll allow you to make sure that a new nut will spin on there. You may do some damage to it. But again, we are replacing this control arm, so this is an acceptable way to do it. And there you have it. We've successfully removed that control arm. Now that we're ready for installation, before we put that lower front control arm in, we do need to assemble this slightly. The ball joint on this front control arm, when installed, does not have enough clearance underneath the axle to actually get this tightened up or even get a socket under there. So we're gonna take the control arm as well as the ball joint and the new nut, move over to our vise and get this fastened up before putting it into the car. We have our lower control arm over at the vise. We're going to use a T40 in the center of the ball joint. Once you have the ball joint fitted, you're only going to be able to turn it a couple of turns before that Loctite engages. So we're going to use the T40 to counter hold that while tightening the nut, which is a 21. We're going to get this as close to tight as we can, and then we'll go back with a torque wrench, giving it the final torque. That's close enough. Now the final torque on this is 140 Newton meters. And again, it would be very difficult to get this socket up underneath that axle. So if you do have the ball joint installed, trying to torque the ball joint, you will need to remove that axle or remove the entire control arm like we have here. So I'm just gonna do 140 Newton meters. There we go. Now that's torqued, we're ready to go ahead and install this back into the vehicle. Just like when we removed the ball joint, we do have the separator still in there. I didn't remove that when we got this out. I let that kind of sit there. It's not gonna do any damage. It's just gonna make your life a lot easier upon reinstallation. We've already got our ball joint installed at the vise, so you wanna slip it underneath the control arm here, kind of getting it into position. And then once this is up into position, we can go ahead and release the separator here. That will hold that ball joint in place while you fit the rest of the hardware. So before you release the separator here, you want to make sure that that ball joint is all the way bottomed out in there, because the provision or little half cut section of the ball joint will receive the bolt. So if this is not lined up properly, you'll have difficulty getting that bolt lined up. So again, make sure that this is fully sunk in there before releasing that. And before we go ahead and attach anything else, let's grab the old bolt and just make sure it fits in place. And it looks like it's going to thread in there just fine. Yep, so we'll go ahead and take that one back out and start fitting all the other hardware. There we go. And that's just about lined up. All right, so we're just gonna take a little punch here and line this bolt hole up so that we don't drag that bolt upon reinstallation. And trying to center that the best we can. All right, now we're gonna have to turn the wheel back over so we can fit that bolt in there and make that clearance on the inner tie rod. We can go ahead and push that boot up out of the way, trying to get the clearance we need. And you may need a little bit of a hammer to kind of force it past. All right, try to get into the center of that triple square there. And again, make sure that when you're putting that in there, as you're dragging on that boot, you don't want to rip that boot. It may even help to put a little bit of lubricant there so as it's getting its way past that boot, it doesn't pinch or drag. We have the lower control arm in, and before we start fitting any of the other fasteners, we did get this one in. I'm going to just go ahead and support the knuckle to get the lower strut fork positioned up here. That should be that. We do still have the other side assembled, so we can make sure that we know which way the bolt goes, generally from the front to the back. We're gonna double check, and I was right. With another fastener on the back side. And then the same on the other side. So I wanted to make a quick note. The fasteners on the knuckle will have the Loctite, they'll be the 21. All the fasteners you're using on the lower control arm going to the subframe as well as the strut fork are gonna be the 18 millimeter with that other washer. So we're just gonna loosely fit these. We're not gonna tighten these just yet. We'll get to that portion later on in the video. Now that we've got these fitted, we're gonna lower this back down, put the ball joint nut back in, and then continue reassembly. All right, so we already made sure that the bolt is lined up for that ball joint when we were fitting the ball joint itself. Just gonna go ahead and install the new bolt, and we're gonna torque this 16 millimeter bolt to 40 Newton meters. Again, just like the top pinch bolt, not very tight. Just gonna double check, make sure that one's good. But now we're gonna move on to the rear portion of the control arm. We're gonna have to turn this knuckle back straight, or maybe even a little bit towards the left to give us a little room. And now that should be enough to get that arm in. All right, so quite simply, we're just gonna install the ball joint into the knuckle, getting that lined up, and we'll take the other nut with the green-blue Loctite, get that snugged up. Now we can go ahead and fit the rear section of that in. And we are almost there. Take our mallet, give it a couple of whacks into position. Now we're gonna take the bolt from the inside of the engine bay. We're gonna go into the control arm, trying to line that up as best we can. Might need a little persuasion. Come on. There we go. And just finger tighten the nut on the back side. Now I'm just gonna snug all these lightly with an 18 so that they don't fall out while we're getting the vehicle down to ride height. All right, now that we have the rest of the bolts snugged up and the back side of this control arm in, we can go back to the ball joint that we started to hand tighten, and I'm just gonna zip it up with a 21 millimeter on my gun, and then I'll go back and torque it to the 140 Newton meters. And that takes care of that. And with that, we're now ready to go ahead and reinstall our wheels. We're gonna get the vehicle back down on the ground before reinstalling that sway bar link that we discussed in the beginning, and get ready to start tightening up some of these bushings that go to the subframe, to the lower strut fork, as well as this rear control arm to the subframe as well. All right, so we're kind of realizing that A, we don't have enough wood to be able to swing this torque wrench, and B, my torque wrench is starting to hit the tire when I'm trying to get this inner front lower control arm bolt tightened up. We're able to get to the lower strut fork, we're able to get to the sway bar link, but honestly, it's gonna be a lot easier with the wheel off. So what we're gonna try to do is, we've already made a measurement for the ride height. So we're gonna get the car off the lift, put all the other 3 tires on the ground, this one off, and we're gonna try to compress this spring with the floor jack, and then hopefully that'll give us enough room to swing our torque wrench and actually do the final torque on this stuff. So again, we'd probably be able to get to this and this if we had like a 4-post lift or something with a little bit more clearance, but trying to get these final torques on the ground, laying on your stomach or your back, and not even having enough clearance is definitely going to be a problem. All right, after a little bit of messing around with this, we've got the vehicle's ride height back to how it was with the wheel off. We have the vehicle off the 2-post lift and compressing the suspension with the pole jack. We've got all our 3 wheels on the car, and most of the weight is on the other wheels right now. So if we were to try to do this on the lift arm starts to get a little bit loose, and it's really not really a safe way to make sure that we're going to get this all figured out. So I'm going to try to get these close to the torque spec just by hand, and then I'll go back in with a torque wrench. The lower control arms at the subframe are 70 Newton meters. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the first 70 Newton meters, get the car up in the air, and hopefully the 70 Newton meters will hold the bushing in place while we get that bolt to the final 180 degrees. It's not going to be very easy to show you guys what's going on here, but you can kind of get the idea. So we're going to torque the lower strut fork first. We're going to get the 18 millimeter on the end of that. Got it. All right, I'm gonna feel that one tomorrow. So unfortunately we can't get to the other ones underneath the car down here, so we are gonna try to do this with the wheel off. While we're down here though, we are gonna tighten up the sway bar link that we replaced the hardware on as well. And that's pretty much the only other things we're gonna be able to get to underneath the car. So we're gonna finish up the lower portion of the sway bar link now. All right, so we're gonna do 40, double check it. Got it. Now we have all the bushings pretty much hand tightened up and got through the first sequence of the torque spec. That's going to pretty much hold all the bushings in place while we lift the vehicle up, and then do that final degree on the bushings as well as the sway bar links. So again, we've gone through all the lowers here. Once we get the wheel off, we can take care of the uppers that go into the body, and then we'll soon be able to take our test drive. So before we get the vehicle all the way up in the air and try to finalize the bottoms, we do have plenty of room to get the top control arm bolts tightened. Those are going to be 50 Newton meters plus 90 degrees, and it's a 16 millimeter socket. So we're going to go ahead and get those while we still have the car on the ground. All right, now we're going to give it our good old college try and just do a 90-degree turn with the ratcheting wrench here. About as close to 90 as we're gonna get. As you can see, it's quite a tight bolt. Let's go ahead and try to get that front one. Oh, all right, that took a lot of effort and not a lot of room there. So we've got the 2 uppers torqued to 50 Newton meters plus the 90 degrees. We've got all the lowers torqued to the 70 Newton meters, and we're gonna get the car up in the air and hopefully get that 180 degrees with plenty more room to swing a wrench. So catch you guys once we get the car up in the air. So we are just gonna finish the 180 degree torque on these, trying to counter hold the front of the bolt with a triple square. If you recall from earlier, it was very difficult to get a triple square seated in there. So you do see I have a triple square on a breaker bar to give us a little bit of extra clearance there. Really try to get that sunk in there well. All right, now we're counter holding the bolt on the rear control arm with the 18 and turning the other side with an 18 as well. We've marked that so we can kind of get an idea. All right. Ready? Yep. Oh my God, that wrench is about to snap. As you can see, we were struggling a little bit to get that final torque on there. Ideally, you just want to get that bolt as tight as you possibly can and making sure that it is a new bolt. The torque spec is probably somewhere around 300 Newton meters, and as you can see, I have my 300 Newton meter torque wrench right here to my side. Thanks, bud.
No problem.
All right, so the final torque on the sway bar link hardware is 90 degrees after the 40 Newton meter. And what we've done here is we've just marked them with a pen marker, and we're gonna try to turn those nuts 90 degrees while counter holding the head of the bolt. Now we gotta move on to finishing up the control arms. We got those at about a 90 degree already, but we do need to finalize those to 180. We weren't able to do that with the suspension compressed, so we're gonna try our darndest to get that at 180, and need to finish up this one as well. So let's get that one out at the knuckle taken care of. Switch tools.
All right, ready?
Yep. Oh my God.
Oh, we're getting this one.
Yep, that one we're getting.
Sounds better.
I think that's that. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Hopefully your friend's still sticking around for you. because those bolts are definitely a lot tighter than we expected. We've got everything else reassembled. We can go ahead, if you did take it all the way out, and reinstall the front headlight level sensor. And it is just the 10 millimeter bolt that bolts it to the frame, and then the 10 millimeter nut that fixes the link to the lower control arm. When you get the bolt fixed in there, make sure that this is into the second hole here. If that is not in the right spot, you may have an adjustment issue down the road. Making sure that tab engages in the front section. And then you will be holding part of the heat shield in with this 10 millimeter. So you will have to line up that a little bit. Just gonna snug that up by hand, and then we'll use a 10 millimeter to tighten that down. And the link is gonna go in from the back of the control arm towards the front, where you're gonna put in the 10 millimeter nut. And just like when we removed it, you can use a 9 millimeter to counter hold the link. Doesn't have to be really technically torqued. We're just gonna snug it up and give it another quarter turn or so. Same thing with the 10 millimeter bolt. It's about a 10 Newton meter torque spec, so we're just gonna snug this up by hand, and that should be good. Now we're able to run the harness back and affix it to the bracket. So it is gonna go over, tie into the bracket, and then run the connector in. We did leave a couple of bushings loose, so once we get the vehicle back all the way down on the ground, we can go ahead and tighten up all 4 corners at the same time. And with that, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall these wheels, torquing the lug bolts to 120 Newton meters, and then that pretty much wraps up our DIY on the front control arms. So we hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If that's the case, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to see any more DIYs like these control arms, wheels, tires, suspension, what have you, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comment section below. As always, we appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.